Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And hopefully all of you are in a celebratory mood for giving to Iowa Catholic Radio as we are just wrapping up our spring fundraiser. We are the Uncommon Good. I'm Bo Bonner, Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives down at Mercy College of Health Sciences. Bud, word is you work where I work too.
I am working there at Mercy College of Health Sciences as the Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So always fun in the realm of history, philosophy, math, science. We run the gamut. The spring fundraiser is fun too. I like how the station makes it fun.
There's music, there's little
Central.
songs. Yeah,
and we
Pledge Central.
Pledge Central. We were using Morse code to communicate with Pledge Central.
Yeah, there was. We got to talk to priests all throughout the diocese. We didn't have an argument with Joe Stopulos, but it was a very lively. There was electricity in the air. That's what I would say.
You could tell it's a healthy rivalry, kind of like Iowa State, Iowa.
Oh wow,
and
that one's healthy.
We were the
I'm
clones.
teasing.
Did they distribute the bundle of meat yet?
I don't know, but
JR Meats on Wednesday. I was on the air with Mark Campbell, and I sort of put Deacon Mark on the spot. I was like, "Can host win the bundle of meats?" And I don't know.
There's legal terminology that he didn't have in front of him that you sprung on him.
He intimated that it might look shady if host started to winning the bundles.
Well, then don't make us read it all the time. I was licking my lips thinking about well, if I won said bundle, what I would be doing during Easter week.
And it's kind of crazy. So we're entering into Holy Week, holiest week of the year. And by crazy, I mean just Lent rushing like it did, but that's kind of how time works, I guess.
We're in between. So we just got done with spring break at Mercy College. And you guys probably can tell I still have a bit of a froggy voice. We didn't go on spring break. I was just sick. So we had to do a replay last week. However, I'm hoping that our students are more energized, ready for class. But as you said, Bud, we are getting geared up for Passiontide into Holy Week and then, of course, Easter. And so, like you said, this time of year, I keep saying, oh, the weather's getting better, and then I think a blizzard comes after that. So maybe I won't even mention that. But it's certainly that case that many turning points, not only in the secular calendar, but particularly in the liturgical one.
Well, Easter there's a variety of weather on Easter. I didn't know the right way to say that one either, but I was going through my memories, which are stored only on social media now, not in my mind. And I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3, that there was snow on Easter in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. But then again, when your family came over, when we first moved back to Des Moines and we had that Easter egg hunt, it was amazingly beautiful. We might be in store for some cold weather because I think this is an early Easter for Western Catholics, for Western Christians.
Absolutely. And so in Wichita had a snow on Easter the first year I ever moved up to Iowa. Yeah. So things can get wacky. You know, it is wacky, Bud. This resurrection of the dead business. And I think sometimes we normalize it a bit too much. And so for this week and next, we want to talk about what the implications of Easter are. We will get to that at the top of the next segment. So let's go ahead and go to the commercials. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show, whether you do that through the Iowa Catholic airwaves, iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, and then, of course, people who listen on podcast. Your donations have been mattering a great deal this last week. We've had matching donations and challenge grants. If you've not had a chance to donate, 515-223-1150 or the iowacatholicradio.com in order to donate. I know we've had some kerfluffles with antennae. I don't know what the right word is. And I'm not going to act like I'm an expert to say where they are. Make sure to check iowacatholicradio.com and their social media for updates on that. However, keep your prayers up. St. Michael the Archangel, St. Gabriel. I think just the holy angels are often invoked for the sake of radio signals. But I will be honest, again, the sort of repairs that come up that we're not thinking about, that's the sort of thing that is only able to be taken care of by the good graces and almsgiving of all of you out there. So 515-223-1150 or iowacatholicradio.com to donate, to make sure to finish up and put a cherry on top of the spring fundraiser, and so that we can expand, do all the sort of maintenance we need to, etc. But I threw out to you a daunting task. You know how the joke is you like to say open-ended questions right before break, but I like proposing like extremely long series of radio shows. I think I'm doing pretty good for me. Just a 2-part series.
Okay. This
week into next week. But it was actually a lot of the events of things that we've been doing very recently, and I think we can narrate this here pretty quick. But a lot of that made me think of this fact that I've said this multiple times to people, and it's apropos to things that have been happening in our lives, talks that we've given, and the fact that Lent is coming to an end and then Easter will begin. But you tell me right now if I'm wrong theologically. When we think about rest, R-E-S-T.
Find out what you mean to me. No, it sounded like a similar cadence.
I immediately thought of that. Rest, R-E-S-T, rest. In our fallen state in the cosmos, we usually cannot conceive of rest except in a term of absence. Rest is the absence of work. Like we go and we do 24/7, however long we work. We don't work 24/7, but you get my point. We work a lot. We run out of energy, and we say we need to rest so that we can get the energy in order to get back to work, have the recharged battery, etc. What's interesting is I would almost argue that the theological movement that all of us are involved in is not only the capstone of it, for instance, in the 7 days of creation, for instance, is on the seventh day God rested. But of course, God doesn't get tired. God doesn't expend effort when he does things. The thing that most commentators theologically point out is on the seventh day God rested because, of course, before the first day even began, he rested. There's not things that God needs to do. He doesn't have a garden. He doesn't have deadlines, and he expends no effort to create the entire universe. So actually with God, rest is the perfect activity. And what we're trying to do in various ways is at least participate in rest as activity and not simply rest as recharging. So on this earth, it's going to be the case. Our bodies get tired. We need to recharge. We need to not do anything so that our bodies can recover. Although, as modern science has shown, sleep, you actually do tons while you're asleep. You're just not aware of it. But I think what Lent into Easter has taught us is that rest is an activity, and it's actually the activity we should be preparing for when we get to heaven. So far, do you think I'm right, or am I a material heretic?
This whole thing seems really central to the biblical vision, and I was thinking about this with the story of creation, or the narrative of creation, where the Sabbath rest is just at the heart of what's being communicated. The reason I bring that up, not only because you broached the conversation today, but, you know, in American Christianity, we've got all sorts of, I think the faith as it's expressed has different challenges at different eras. And one thing that we find ourselves wrestling with a lot is, I think, what's called the Protestant work ethic has bled into a lot of Catholicism. Or maybe I'll make it personal for myself. You know, I kind of imbibe that mentality where if I go a few days without going into work, I start to get kind of antsy, like, oh, they're going to think I'm dispensable, or, maybe at times have been prone to spending too many hours doing that sort of thing. Where with Genesis 1 through 3, God, when he creates everything, doesn't give us a workaday schedule. That's not the telos of the purpose. It's all moving to this Sabbath rest. Now, like you're pointing out, Bo, to really get the theological point behind all that, we have to understand rest properly. We can talk about this some more, but it's not simply kicking our feet up on the ottoman, cracking open a beer, and watching football, however much I love all three of those activities. But the very vision of why human beings were created is for that Sabbath rest. In the 10 Commandments, the one commandment that includes the word holiness, which of course is at the heart of our life as Christians, is the command to make holy the Sabbath, to sacralize it or make it sacred. So this is all essential. St. Augustine, when he talks about heaven, he sees it as an eternal Sabbath rest. So you can't really overemphasize this point enough.
And I like how you were pointing this out. There's actually a lot of effort that goes into rest as an activity. There's actually a lot of effort that goes into making it where you can just lay back or be entertained or go to sleep. But particularly, right, this theological Sabbath rest, it takes a lot of work. Not really, I'm using it in such scare quotes, but it takes a lot of effort in order to rest well, to rest with God, and then to rest with him in eternity. And so the sort of beginning and end of all of this is to say, it can seem like Lent is just one more season where the church adds a lot of stuff for you to do. But actually, asceticism's idea is to practice rest, that even the good things in this life, we are going to set them aside because the rest that we will have in God, that we can have a preview of in this life, but very much in its fullness in heaven, begins now. And the sort of rest from the good things in this life prepare us to accept resting in God in the resurrection of Jesus Christ at Easter. But the reason today, at least, and we'll bring these up in both episodes, this last week, I think we personally have had a lot of things happen where this idea of rest is embedded in this and is a commonality, but maybe needs teased out. So two things. One, very personally, my great Aunt Jo, who is sort of the patriarch of my dad's side of the family, she got ill, went in, and had hospice care, and then has passed away. And I want to say to all the people, I know there's multiple people who've listened who have simply rained down prayers on our family, and I want to say thank you for all of that in the soul of Aunt Jo, a fellow Catholic who we got last rites and everything. That'll be part of the story to tell. But this idea of a very important woman who was very active and busy, making so many lives better, what does it mean for her to take her final rest in this life so that she can prepare for resting in God? At the same time, Bud, and I'll throw it to you, tell the good folks what we were able to do in a little corner of Kansas this last week.
Yeah, these topics came up when Bo and I met in Atchison, Kansas at Benedictine College down there. They do an annual symposium on transforming culture. And this year's theme had to do with education, but we really got into the theology of rest, or you could say contemplation, because with the students that we teach at Mercy College, all of them are going into health professions. So as nurses, sonographers, RTs, all these different fields, and their education is really geared towards outcomes. And that's even how we analyze or evaluate the quality of the education. So here at Mercy, we've got accreditors, these sort of governing bodies that exist above us, you could say, in a certain sense. And accreditation has to do with, like, are you leading your students to the outcomes that make them quality health professionals? Well, because of that, and this is a term I know we use on the show a lot, but I think it's just really it's an important question that we have to tackle today. Education in the modern university, modern colleges has become very utilitarian, meaning it's very like pragmatic, outcome oriented. We could talk about success. We could talk about income. Obviously, all these questions are very important, but of course there's a thread in Catholic thought, especially going back to someone like St. Thomas Aquinas or the saint who I have a great devotion to, St. John Henry Newman, where they say that knowledge sought, the truth, is a good as an end in itself. So undoubtedly, as we learn more, especially in the sciences, mathematics, etc., that can have these kind of practical outcomes, especially as it intersects with our career paths. But we could say, as Catholic institutions, are we sometimes too utilitarian in how we think about education? So one thing that Bo and I tried to press at this symposium, I think Bo did a great job at it in his presentation, was to say we have to carve out space, or we even have to orient the education in such a way that there's room for contemplation, room for wonder, where the students they ask these questions, not simply about philosophy. Sometimes we sort of want to say, like, well, if we add philosophy, that kind of does the trick. But even as they go about learning about the human body and how it functions and everything, how do they help patients find healing? in such a way that takes into account all that Catholic thought says about the human person.
And so, first of all, beautiful summary, bud. There's also some other great stuff. We had some great jokes. There was some really nice. I mean, let me shout out Matt Mueller, who is, what do they call that? King Chancellor of the...
Yeah, he teaches theology down there, but he's in charge of the symposium. And, folks, here in Des Moines, it's only like a 3-hour drive. Mm-hmm. You can carpool with me and Bo next year.
That's right.
They should raffle that or something for the fundraiser.
That would be good,
but
it might get no money.
It's usually it wouldn't get as much money as Joe's little piano concert that he puts on.
He could play piano in
as we drive.
A party bus. Oh, we got it.
I already have a 15-passenger van, so my wheels are turning. But it's worth the drive. Matt Mueller, a good friend of mine from graduate
school. It's Mueller. I always say Mueller.
It's fine. Either way, potato. At St. Louis University, he just puts on a great symposium. Next year, I think the theme has to do with marriage and the family. So this year, I encourage folks, if you're able to track down some of the presentations and things, it was about education. And I know here in the diocese, we're thinking a lot about how do we educate our young people well. So it's worth the trip.
So for me, what was really striking, and first of all, friends coming from all corners of the universe seemingly, but Catholic universe particularly, to help me out with a very personal trip. I ended up going all the way down to Oklahoma with a priest. I don't want to out who it is because I don't want people to think that it's a regular thing to get priests, to travel that way with you.
But it was Cardinal Burke.
I kid. That's right. It was the Pope.
Yeah.
But a friend who's a priest who was willing to make that effort in an interesting situation. The majority of my family is not Catholic. In fact, I think on that side of the family, it's myself and my Aunt Jo. My Aunt Jo converted very late in life, I think well into her 70s maybe. And so there's a whole host of issues. She lives in a very rural part of Oklahoma. She's not really close to a lot of parishes. And so some of the communication stuff, I don't want to cast any aspersions on that. But my family, God bless them, the good Baptists, they knew that she was Catholic, and they asked, we heard about this last rites stuff. We'll ask Bo about how this works out. And so my experience was to drive 7 hours down into Oklahoma with my buddy who's a priest, who did a beyond beautiful last rites ceremony, keyed into the fact that most of the people in that room were not knowing what was going on. And it was a transformative moment. We then jump in the car. The priest dumps me off in Atchison. We give this, what I was very happy with, this talk about great books, education, and medical education. And then we get to drive back. So it was quite the trip. But what really stuck out to me, Bud, is these two things, which I think some people would go were unrelated, right? I had this big family thing, and then we had this conference paper. I just kept being struck again and again that in both places, the idea of rest is something that we must try to achieve and not just carve out negative time for. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, is how the rest that is in something like the rest you are taking on your hospice bed, that you're getting last rites in, and is related to, because we hear leisure, that's like the Joseph Piepers of the world. That's what they would call, the leisure requisite to have contemplation, like you were saying.
Yeah.
But really it's rest in terms of education. And so if I have to give like a T-shirt example of this, what I think you and I are trying to tell people is truth is not something to be grasped and then utilized as a tool. We have to rest in the truth. But what does that mean for professions? And I think that is what I'm hoping dwelling on today will strangely point us to, the rest and contemplation that Lent and Easter are teaching about. So a bold claim, and I'm glad I have my good friend here who's willing to go on strange adventures on the radio to talk about these things.
Yeah.
But I want to start first with the education part. But one of the things that I think we do well, so I'm bragging about us right here, is I think we're a good 1-2 punch when it comes to whenever we get the opportunity to give papers or talks. What I think really succeeds is we hit these things not from opposite angles, but certainly from different strategies. And so on one hand, if, someone is, annoyed or bored by me or you, they usually get something from the other person. But I think people who are able to stick in and hear like the sort of resonance between the two different ways of pointing it out will truly get some insight. What I appreciated most about you, so you started out sort of talking about the big arc or narrative of why John Henry Newman particularly, is worried about A, education in general, but B, what he thinks is actually the difficulties with a profession like medicine being a part of what a university is up to. So we've, of course, talked about this on the show multiple times. But, for you, what is the heart of what you were trying to bring up? Because the whole conference was on education. John Henry Newman got mentioned a lot, but I think we had a unique take on this because we were talking about professions, one, and then two, particularly about the medical sciences.
Well, to be fair, or to full disclosure, I covered 400 years of history, and it's always dangerous to do that. But what I was trying to isolate or identify is this sea change in the way that education is delivered. And I was drawing on some different thinkers, but one of them, our good friend Jeffrey Bishop, who teaches bioethics at SLU, he talks about how around the time of the French Revolution, there were some important changes in medicine and in medical education. And one of them had to do with, so again, painting with sort of broad strokes, at the time, there's kind of a revolt against the older tradition of hospitals. So really, as we've talked about on the show before, hospitals grew up in the Christian culture, and a lot of times it had to do with where monasteries were located and things. So it was a form of hospitality to serve those who were sick or dying. With the French Revolution and sort of like the strand of Enlightenment thought, that tradition is seen as overtly sort of religious in a negative way, in a pejorative way. And so there's a move more to the clinic and where the human body is kind of objectified. And there's a whole different sort of, we could call this an anthropology or understanding of the human person and what sort of treatment they need when they come for medical care. And I was arguing that sort of understanding still frames much of medical education today, where the emphasis is on objectivity and one way you could put it, this isn't completely fair, but I think it captures still an important point, is sort of keeping parts in motion.
Yeah.
So when you go to the hospital, you say, I want my loved one, whatever is ailing their body, to hopefully be cured. And the cure is sort of framed in terms of can you extend their physical life? Undoubtedly, that's at the heart of medicine, that's an important reason that you go there. But what we've lost is this kind of holistic understanding and an acknowledgement that at some point, the patient, whoever they are, is going to die. Now, hopefully it's not at that hospital visit. It might be further down the road. But just in thinking about human life and human flourishing, I feel like medicine today has kind of moved away from that more classic understanding to a point where, again, this ties into kind of utilitarianism. The patient comes, they pay a fee, the hospital extends their life, and then they check out. If they happen to stay in the hospital and they die on that occasion, on that visit, the way sometimes that we accompany them in their final stages of life is, I think, a far cry from that beautiful experience that you described with your Aunt Jo.
So we're getting ready to go to the break, but you hit on, it's like I brain transferred this to you. I wanted you to say bodies in motion because it's this motion and this frantic motion that I think is an emblematic symbol over against rest, both in terms of convalescence in a medical, situation and in the acquiring of the knowledge to do so. We'll jump right back into that. It's a fantastic point, Bud. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. If you didn't get a chance to contribute for the spring fundraiser, you still have time to do so. 515-223-1150 or iowacatholicradio.com to make a secure donation. Thank you for everybody who gave throughout the week. We have wonderful people that are supporting us. we can't tell you how much we appreciate what all you do. But I'm excited to keep going on with what we just dropped off, as it were, in the segment before. So, to be honest, there's a lot to set up. So if you haven't heard, you might have to just listen to the podcast. But essentially, we're getting into this idea of rest as activity, certain events that happened this week that made rest become very apparent to me, and I think both of us. One of those is around the death of a family member of mine. I think I might have accidentally said patriarch, but I meant matriarch of my family, Aunt Joe. But then what we're going to talk about right now, Bud and I had the chance to give a presentation at Benedictine College's, what's it called?
Their symposium on transforming culture.
Sorry, I totally blanked. And it was on education, and we had the chance to talk about education and the medical professional instruction because where we work. You left off with a brilliant point that whatever else we want to say about how medicine ended up being in the modern world, a dominant metaphor is something to the effect of we want to keep particles in motion or body parts in motion, right? Yeah. That we have a material body and we're going to exclude a lot of other concerns because what we're concerned about is this biological machine and making sure it ticks and it moves like it's supposed to. And so for me, if we're talking about rest, what a good, and by good I mean horrible, symbol or even just metaphor to think of the frantic way medicine can appear to be just a lot of motion to people. And I don't even mean this pejoratively. So what I'm not trying to say is like, these nurses and doctors, can't they just walk where they're going? I'm not saying anything silly like this. I'm saying that symbolically, it sort of gets to the heart of what this education looks like. Bud and I know too well, so it's hard to convey this to you guys. We're in the middle of a crisis where people don't have enough nurses, for one. There's a lot of other health professionals that we're low on. And Bud, can you think of a better word than frantic for how they're trying to figure out how we do something about that workforce shortage?
No, I think that's helpful. You know, one, what is it in the New Testament for the work of Satan? Sometimes it's like ekbalo, like he casts or creates this sort of division. And I think in the wake of some like various crises, we could talk about like fiscal crises, the pandemic, etc. Like you said, medicine, the practice of medicine has been thrown into this frantic disarray, and we're scrambling to try to figure it all out.
What I'm thinking of is, and this is proving why you should do the great books, is Paradise Lost. The city of Pandemonium is the city the demons make, and the image that, John Milton, he obviously has in mind is like buzzing bees, right? Like the demons are these buzzing bees that are just, that, and, you know, that's what a sadia is. Sloth is actually not like running around, like being like slow and like a slug. It really is sort of small movement of the will to avoid the deep movements of the will that are necessary. Now, look, Bud, if tomorrow I have like a heart attack, I hope everybody moves fast to save me. So I'm not being silly. I'm saying there's something at the center of how we educate medicine because we need people there so fast, because we have a shortage, because students want to be educated as fast as possible, because if you go to the hospital, you want to be cured as fast as possible. There's so much, not only speed, and speed's actually the least important part of this metaphor. It's the movements. It's the not being still. And it's interesting that if you look at something like even Florence Nightingale or the Sisters of Mercy or a lot of people who really started the hospitals, convalescence and rest is really the start of a lot of medicine. Indeed, whatever else the old, like the Hippocrates and Galen and some of the old ancient practitioners of medicine that they're wrong about humors and leeches and stuff, but what they got right is the body works best in harmony. And the best way to talk about the harmony, the stasis of a body, is it's sort of at rest with itself. And we dis-ease, right? We even talk the thing that when your body is out of tunes, we say dis-ease. It's at dis-ease with itself. And so what I want to argue is this is not incidental. It's not incidental that if you sort of chalk up everything to being bodies in motion and then knowledge in motion and knowledge obtained as fast as possible for the sake of throwing it at a problem, that you're going to start looking at patients as problems or their need to rest as a problem. Now, there's, of course, I'm not being silly. I'm not saying that doctors don't understand how important rest is. I'm saying it's easy to get that, even their advice, to get lost. And it's not all on them either. This is us, right, as patients. It's funny, but sorry for the bad dad pun. We are impatient patients. Yeah. And we want to get back into the workforce as much as possible. All of this, I think, is a powerful underlying metaphor that when we educate even the professions, who are mostly about instructing them to do certain things, and even powerful ones like medicine that have done miraculous things in the last 2 centuries, that at the heart of it, there has to be this idea of stasis, of coming to rest in oneself. And Bud, this is the hard part. When we educate people to do things like medicine, do we give them the leisure, the restful approach to truth for them to rest in it and contemplate it? Because if they don't have that, it's always going to be this sort of buzzing, right? Like a pandemonium. Yeah. Because like you said, we're never going to totally fix our bodies, but medicine and healing presumably can happen even up to one's last breath.
I've got some thoughts. I have to make one quick correction. I guess we need a fact checker on the show. Right when I paused at the end of that last comment, I was thinking ekbalo in the Greek. I think I said ekbalo is the activity that Satan does. It's the activity of our Lord. That's the Greek term for exorcism. I mean, Satan, Diablo, he's the sower of discord and disunity.
Right.
So the point stands. But for those who know New Testament Greek, I didn't want to, get piled on. The phone line was ringing off the hook. No, but this point, Bo, so important, so well taken. The way that we even talk about medical education today, and as you were speaking, I was thinking, there is a serious issue that we're confronting. And so we do need a kind of urgency. And I think urgency is not a bad thing for Catholics and leaders to adopt, but there's a way where we can go about it, where we actually exacerbate the problem. Mm-hmm. And what you were driving at, man, I've really struggled with that one. So even sometimes the language that we use, and we shouldn't be dismissive of the importance of language, because our language informs our vision and it impacts how we see the world and the actions that we take in the world. So when we talk about nurses having burnout, or, a lot of times when we talk about our staffing, we say the workforce, it's almost like this forceful energy or something. And so the metaphors that we begin to use, and then the ways that we begin to address the problems, where you were talking at the symposium, this great conversation about certification and the move to register nurses, which historically was a way to kind of verify that someone truly was a part of that profession. But when we face this problem of low staffing, all of a sudden we say, how can we make the educational process as quick and efficient as possible? And Bo, I just want to caveat, we're not trying to save our jobs. I mean, I care about my own employment, but just really addressing this serious issue in a just manner, we start to move to places where we are creating more burnout by trying to do things as quickly as possible. And what that leads to is no space for contemplation. I don't know. I don't have quick and easy answers. I know when we look back to the practice of nursing in the past, there are some reference points that I think would be good for us to think about and recover. Even to this day, I still hear people living in Des Moines tell stories about when they were in the hospital here at Mercy, and the sisters would sometimes walk through the hospital hallways with the Blessed Sacrament ringing a bell.
Right.
And just that bell and the space that was created for prayer, it cultivated a completely different ethos
and it's not
at
that,
our hospital.
And and to interrupt you just real quick, it's not that was magical in itself, or that if you just did that, everything would be fine. What I think you're saying, tell me if I'm wrong, is that was a symbol of a much deeper reality that people go, of course, this is something you would do at a hospital.
It was the surface level experience. By surface level, I mean, it was what was most immediately visible, but that was really, really the tip of the iceberg, where it was a manifestation of this kind of unique formation that the sisters got as nurses. And that's really where you start to get at transformative change. how do you provide an education to the future healthcare professionals? That's the thing though. It can't just be aping what the sisters were doing, because obviously our students are coming from a different place and they have a different vocation. Most of our students are parents, and so their life will take on a different shape than the sisters did.
Right.
But how do we provide the kind of deep roots that the sisters had?
Well, and this was what I was trying to get at with my 2 points. Again, we either need to just publish this or just put, because I've heard multiple people, all of them have come at like exploring this arc in many ways. I really like how you put it for a lot of people. I think a lot of people were able to see a lot of work has gone into this. Many of our friends, shout out to Kristen Collier and Charlie Camosi, for instance, people we've worked really close with, along with Jeff Bishop. I like yours. I'm being serious here as a compliment. The pamphlet version, like I think that's what a lot of people need to hear about education, is that sort of arc and change and why it causes problems. Yeah. What I was trying to hope to do, on one hand, to answer your point, I was making this big point that, of course, because we were talking about Newman in Idea of the University, Lecture 10, which is mostly what you covered, he speaks directly to medicine. In Lecture 8, he talks about the biological sciences. And what's interesting is for him, he thinks there's actually no problem with physics and theology being in the same place, because he goes, well, there's sciences that, of course, have different ends and goals completely. And he gets down to sort of not carving up, but just mentioning Aristotle's 4 causes and going, oh, it makes every sense in the world that physics is going to talk about material and efficient cause. And, of course, theology could talk about all of them, but it's really going to emphasize final and formal cause. What I was trying to bring up is that's why it's important for us to not act like, the secular world figured out a way to do science and us dum-dums are just catching up.
Yeah.
We need to be able to say, like, look, science, to my mind, should be like asceticism. You don't give up bad things in Lent. You give up good things to focus on others. So it makes perfect sense to me that you could say, okay, for right now, intentionally, we're not going to consider final and formal cause, not because they're not real or bad, but when we have this ascetic practice of considering material and efficient cause, we're able to do things like figure out that metformin helps diabetics, right? Like there's a lot goes in between that, but you get what I'm saying. But this gets to, Bud, that means you have to take the time that someone knows the 4 causes first, chooses intentionally, and that intentionality is very important, like in a Simone Weil sort of way, intentionally sets aside some ascetically for the sake of others, and you can, of course, do that opposite, right? Like think more about final and formal cause, leaving the other 2, but so that they get recombined later.
Yeah.
But that takes time. That takes this rest we're talking about. This takes thinking that there's a homeostasis to be reached, where then when we're doing this the best, all 4 causes, or whatever, however mode you want to put this in, are all considered, even if we consider them one at a time or in tandem or whatever that might be. The second thing I tried to bring up, you're right, the certification, which I want to be careful what I say. I don't want to make anyone mad. I love being certified as a college bud. But I will say this. What I brought up is apprenticeship weirdly being used against its like oldest meaning.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if anyone's following this in news, but when people talk about apprenticeship, they basically mean don't go to school, just it's sort of on-the-job training.
Yeah.
And that might be rude, but sometimes I think they're being rude to us. But I will say it's what's interesting. Apprenticeship used to mean you were an apprentice and you had a master who knew you so well they would vouch for you. But we've replaced that with certification. And I'm not saying that it's obvious what we should do. I'm saying that gets to the heart of where we're at. And I think that gets one more time, Bud, to this like frantic activity instead of saying we have to carve out enough time where we could talk about, yes, the 2 causes that matter most in medicine, but in relation to all 4, or that we have students know us well enough, excuse me, that even if we're going to certify them, because I want a certified nurse when I'm sick, but that we think that our professors could vouch for them as well. And I'm not acting like people don't, but it's getting increasingly harder and harder. That, to me, I think is where we're ending up with this notion of rest in the talk that we gave.
Well, I was struck when Newman talks about all these things about his foresight and foreseeing some of the problems that we were going to run into. You know, some of the examples that he gives in that final discourse of the idea of a university, they sound sort of simplistic in our ears. But what he's trying to get at in that final essay is he says sometimes, theological experts and experts in the medical sciences come into conflict. So he gives, again, sort of a straightforward example. It's actually more prescient than we maybe first imagined. So he says, think of an occasion where a patient is dying and outside the room, a priest arrives and says, it's important that I be able to speak to the patient if she happens to pass or whatnot. And the physician says, no, this shouldn't be allowed because you could psychologically disturb the patient, which could hasten their death. And so Newman says, like here in this case, what the physician is saying is true. What, of course, the priest is saying is true, and they come into this sort of conflict. The reason why I say that's prescient is we can think during COVID-19, there were all these debates about if someone's dying, but they've been infected with a deadly virus, like who should be allowed into the room or not. Now, Newman, of course, the man that he is, thinks, of course, the priest should be able to be let in. But the more general point that he makes from that anecdote is that sometimes what medical experts say is true, but not necessarily what is lawful. And so he says, like the error, the danger that they can fall into is thinking because something is true, it's lawful. Well, they may be able to accurately describe a situation, but still press for a conclusion that we would want to say is unethical or against Catholic thought. In our day and age, relating this back all to the conversation at hand, when we think about educating nurses, for example, at the end of the day, they cannot give what they do not have, that old medieval maxim. And so if they're ministering to those who are sick, and especially those who are dying, one thing that we want them to be able to convey to those patients is peace and rest. Mm-hmm. Now, immediately saying that, there are going to be some listeners who hear that and say, oh, they're punting on medical expertise. But like you're saying, Bo, what we're actually calling them to is something like asceticism. So there will be times during their work life where they'll bracket those concerns, not because those concerns are unimportant, but say, for instance, they're trying to help someone with bad blood pressure. Mm-hmm. They want to understand the physical properties of the body that have brought that person to that point. They want to understand what medications might make a difference in that person's life. But throughout all of that, there will be appropriate occasions. And this is where a friend of ours said something like, it's like Newman's illative sense. By the illative sense, it means a master who can see a situation and see circumstances and make the right call, not because they're like crunching numbers or something, but because they've had the sort of like wisdom, they've cultivated the kind of wisdom that comes from experience. And so bringing those all together, we have to have nurses, I'm just going to use nurses as an example, who know how the body works, who knows what it means to provide the healing that patients come to us for, but also who's able to give something more than that. And that requires, well, we're going to say like a liberal arts education.
And so I think this is setting up perfectly. We got a minute, before we need to wrap this up. Next week when we do the show, we'll set it up with my Aunt Jo in her last days and what it means for the rest, not only that can come with family members that can make it down, that can make the effort to be with her in her final days in something like last rites, but she was a teacher and she was a very active woman. And a lot of people's sense of being at rest, either when she opened up her house in hospitality or at rest in themselves when they had a teacher who believed in them, a lot of that was made precisely because this wonderful woman worked her butt off. And so I know one of the great things that she had to learn there at the end, Bud, because I talked to her about it, is that one of the greatest last lessons she could teach us is how to rest. And so this idea, all these ideas come together, but I'm going to have to leave it as a bit of a cliffhanger. I think it will be a perfect thing to dwell on over Easter weekend. But I do one more time ask if you guys are able to pray for my dear Aunt Jo. And thank you for everyone who's been praying for my family in the meantime. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. One more time, thank you for everybody who was able to donate through our spring fundraising activities. If you still want to join into that, you're capable of doing so. 515-223-1150, or you can go to iowacatholicradio.com and make a secure donation. Thank you for everyone who's donated, but if we can still keep that in our hearts and our prayers, as we have plenty of expansion going on, maintenance, repairs, things that we're trying to do. Thank you again for prayerfully considering donating. 515-223-1150 or iowacatholicradio.com. But I know that was episode 1 of what we're doing. I think it went better than, I'll say it, Star Wars episode 1. And I think next week will go even better than Star Wars episode 2. But I not only had a blast giving that talk with you down at Benedictine, I not only was very encouraged spiritually about the many blessings that accompanied everything that happened last week. But I got to brag about us one more time. I think basically Benedictine should give us an hour to 2 hours every time we go down there to talk, because we're not even done, man, about all the stuff we are sort of extracting from that experience.
Matt Moeller, if you're listening, I know sometimes you do listen to the podcast. Make it happen.
I'll even pronounce your name right from now on.
We've mentioned Benedictine College, I think, 5 times on today's show. So
there you go. Well, Bud, if people want to keep the good times rolling, how can they do that? Through prayer with us here at Iowa Catholic Radio.
Yeah, we've been talking about the spring fundraiser. Besides your generosity and your charitable giving, please do join us in our prayer life here at Iowa Catholic Radio. We pray the rosary on air at 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 2:55 in the afternoon. You can also use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the rosary anytime, anywhere. And Bo, I know at this point you usually go over some of like what's happening in the diocese, since I have a microphone.
Well, and also just real quick, just so everyone who, yes, Mercy College underwrites our show. We appreciate going to Benedictine, but Mercy College underwrites our show. So I think it's very apropos for you to make sure to advertise this and hopefully get some people to come on campus.
Speaking of Mercy College of Health Sciences, Monday, April 8th, beginning at 1 p.m., please join us. We're going to be hosting our annual symposium, research symposium. The theme this year is Immigrant and Refugee Journeys, Healthcare Issues and Opportunities. So a live topic in our country today. Catholic Charities is going to be one of our exhibitors. We're going to be looking at how we can support and accompany immigrants and refugees who come to our country and the sort of like issues that are raised in providing healthcare for a diverse range of people. So Monday, April 8th, 1 p.m., 928 6th Avenue. You just take 235, exit at 7th Avenue, and there's convenient parking right there.
And one more time, thank you, Mercy College, for underwriting our show, mchs.edu. You can also check out other things that are going on through iowacatholicradio.com. If you go there and hit events. For instance, April 12th has multiple things happening at 6 p.m. Peter Herbeck is out at St. John and Paul Church in Altoona. At noon, the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church, they have the Man Up West Power Lunch. May 9th, we got the Iowa Catholic Radio Golf Classic coming up. And then May 15th, the Forge, an evening with Dr. John Bishop. And the Iowa Catholic Radio Family Celebration in June 22nd. Multiple things happening that if you make sure to check what's going on, we would love to have you be a part of everything that goes on in the diocese, other dioceses, the radio listening area. Thank you for participating. Bud, wonderful show. One more time, just for folks, we've mentioned a lot, so I'll just say it one more time, 515-223-1150 or iowacatholicradio.com if you would still like to donate. Looking forward to part 2 next time, partner.
Yes, and it'll be better than Star Wars Episode 2.
Very easily.
Which was better than Episode 1.
Oh,
but
man.
Still,
okay.
Okay. No, is Episode 2 better than Episode 1? I thought Episode 1 was one of the great movies, or most panned movies of all time.
2 is terrible, but
2 has the really cringeworthy, like, romantic.
Romance. Yeah. It's as bad as Sand, and if you guys watch Episode
both of
2
them
lately,
needed to be edited further.
I mean, a lot.
Because there's something online about you can watch Episode 1 without Jar Jar Binks, and it's not a bad movie.
Well, look, this is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.